What's good, DMV Sports Zone? It's Noah back with a fantasy recap and kind of a preview for the week ahead for the Washington Capitals as well as the Washington Wizards. Apologies for not posting a video on the Washington football team and the Baltimore Ravens. But at this point, with the fantasy season, regular season coming to an end, we kind of already know what was the writing on the wall. Gibson, Terry McLaurin now out. Just very few relevant fantasy players for the football team, unfortunately. And on the Ravens, it's always the same. Devonta Freeman is a mid-tier. Mark Andrews as an elite tight end. Lamar Jackson now hurt. Who knows what's going to happen there? So, yeah, with that coming to a close, I'm loving to keep a focus more on the hockey. And interestingly enough, I know everybody knows about him, but I don't think people realize how good Alex Ovechkin is playing right now. With 44 points, only 28 games, he's on pace for 128 points, which would not only be the league lead, but also the best point performance he's ever had in his career. And he's 34, y'all. He's 34. They're talking about LeBron being an ageless wonder. Ovechkin is truly the Iron Man of ice hockey and is one of the greatest players of all time. Forget about the greatest goal scorer. He is really pushing to be in the top 5 best players ever discussion. And how does that translate to fantasy hockey? I'm here to tell you what the down low is. So without further ado, all my fantasy sports information is coming from Sport AI. December 17th, this Friday, we're going to be adding the NBA to the platform. Really excited for you to get the edge now that fantasy football season is coming to a close and now basketball season in the full swing of things. So without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome back to DMV Sports Zone.
Chased down by Beal in the corner for 3, gets fouled and hits.
Welcome to DC.
They tag him out.
You know we're down at the USA Cap. You're taking us lightly. I'm taking us lightly. Now you gon' act on me. We'll be right back. Well, we gon' be right here. We gon' be right here. We ain't going nowhere. Welcome to DC. DC, the home of Chuck Brown. Oh, you don't know the sound? Well, let me break it down.
Yeah, so first things first. I've already said what I need to say. Ovechkin is a top 5 player of all time and without a doubt the greatest goal scorer of all time. Through 28 games, he has 20 goals. 20 goals. He's almost scoring a goal per game. To go along with 24 assists for 44 points in 28 games. On top of that, he's a plus minus of 19. Good enough for top 10 in the NHL. He even has a shorthanded goal and a shooting percentage of 16.9%, pretty much 17%. For somebody that's shooting over 5 shots a game, that is nothing short of incredible. So what does that mean for the fantasy landscape? How does that affect other players? Because that's the thing. With a talented player like that, obviously he's the number 1 ranked fantasy forward right now. But how does that benefit the other Capitals? You can see in the point performance, Evgeny Kuznetsov, Nicholas Backstrom, Tom Wilson even, John Carlson, all are now near a point per game pace, along with a great plus minus on a team that isn't like the 2016 Capitals that were high offense, terrible on defense. They're contributing everywhere. Every single Capital is contributing with a plus minus, hits, block shots, short-ended time, penalty time, power play points. It's an extremely well-rounded team, and we're starting to see even, guys like Garrett Hathaway, depth guys that are borderline minors, bottom 6 guys, are actually decently valuable in fantasy in the right situation. And in terms of this week, they actually have a really friendly schedule. They're going to be playing Chicago tomorrow, which is a weaker team. Great matchup for OV and the Capitals. And for the next week, heading into next week, is a lighter schedule with the holidays. They're only going to be playing four games in the next 8 days or 9 days, which in hockey standards is not that much, which gives them plenty of time to rest, to recuperate, and to continue to push forward. As the sort of goaltending situation hasn't really changed, Samsonov has entrenched himself as the number 1. Vanacek, you can still roll the Vanacek the Samsonov strategy kind of works, but I do, like I said last week, suggest that you drop him because, Vanacek had a good matchup against the Buffalo Sabres. Still didn't come out with that many fantasy-relevant points. So if he can't get a good he can't get good fantasy performances out of that matchup, there's not really a point in holding him. It's better to find another goalie. So yeah, that wraps up talking about the Capitals. Nothing but good news there. Unfortunately, the exact opposite for the Wizards. As a couple nights ago, they were blown out by the Utah Jazz, and there's a lot of concerns with a lot of the new guys. Not only in terms of real life, but from a fantasy perspective, Dinwiddie is absolutely underperforming after a pretty hot start. He's averaging under 10 points a game, under 4 assists, under 3 rebounds. Put in perspective, Raul Neto is outperforming him in fantasy right now, and that shouldn't happen. Dinwiddie is supposed to be our go-to guy. I was fortunate enough to see the game in person, and man, you can see he's really afraid about that knee. Really hesitant, not the same slasher or shooter that he usually is. And on top of that, Bradley Beal's underperforming. Harrell, he's a great energy guy, a solid, consistent performer in terms of real life and fantasy, as well as Gafford. But we're seeing that they're becoming a mismatch against bigger teams. Gobert and even Hassan Whiteside had 18 and 12 against Gafford and Harrell, which is just simply unacceptable. This does, interestingly enough, pave way for Kuzma and Hachimura and maybe even Bryant to have more opportunities in the front court, as Bertans is mainly a body there that we have to play at this point because of the contract. We haven't been able to move him for the past couple of years. Yes, he makes a couple of cool fancy threes, but he's terrible on defense, doesn't shoot very well overall. So in terms of the fantasy relevant players, unfortunately, the Wizards are starting to dwindle. Even our best player, our Supermax player, Bradley Beal, originally went from a top 5 percentile fantasy performer down to the 15th percentile, and with an average ADP of the second round to the late first, that is simply unacceptable. He's averaging a career high in assists, but his shooting is down, his points per game is down, rebounds are down, and he's just not performing to the level that he's expected to with a team that is decent around him. I'm not saying that we have an elite core around Bradley Beal right now, but simply put, Bradley Beal has to perform. If he wants to have that argument that he is an elite fantasy player as well as a real-world elite player, then he has to step up and kind of carry this team at moments. But it seems like either everybody's clicking or everybody's not. So after a hot start, the Wizards are struggling. As a result, everybody's downgraded. Everybody in terms of the fantasy sport, their score plus has been downgraded. The only now fantasy-relevant players it dwindles down to 4. Dinwiddie is barely in the borderline of fantasy relevance. Beal's fantasy relevant. Gafford and Harrell. Kuzma is now downgraded to borderline waiver wire potential tier. So unfortunately, the Wizards are on a downtrend. We'll see what happens, but the analytics doesn't trend well going forward. The schedule is actually only going to get more difficult from here. We do have some easy matchups, quote-unquote easy matchups this week, but we kind of forget that the Wizards are now the easy matchup on the schedule after a red-hot start. So there's a lot of question marks and unfortunately not a lot of answers. Bryant and Hachimura are just simply massive wild cards, only slightly upgraded because of the lack of consistency from the front court may allow them to take a bigger fantasy role. Otherwise, outside of those 4 players I mentioned, everyone else is must avoid in fantasy, unfortunately. You can argue maybe KCP if you're in a categories league, but there's a lot of other better players than him with similar value. You can think about Eric Gordon. He's available in over 55%, 57% of ESPN leagues. And there's a couple other guys that play a similar role and are more consistent than right now the struggling Wizards, unfortunately. So, tale of 2 teams. One is making history. The other one is, sliding towards mediocrity. Analytics doesn't trend well, but we'll see what happens, see if it improves. But that's why I'm here. So I can provide you week-to-week updates to make sure to optimize your fantasy sports lineups. And so that wraps things up. I'm going to be traveling for the next, week or so. Hopefully I can get a video out next week, late Wednesday or Thursday before, the Christmas games. But if not, everyone at DMV Sports Zone, I wish you a wonderful Christmas, a wonderful holidays. Thank you for the support. And if you want more information on Sporty Eye, the link is in the bio. Without further ado, have a wonderful day. Peace.